On the build-up for the Switch 2's release, Nintendo put over several factors for it, a bunch of features, especially things like game chat or mouse functionality with the either Joy-Con, 120 FPS on the screen, HDR, 4K. They were throwing a lot of stuff out there, but something they kind of undersold at this point, and just based on not only the reaction, but also the detective work online, it's pretty clear it's a major aspect of the Switch 2 for people, and I wanted to go over that here today because I think there is a pretty big opportunity here, not only for Nintendo, but also a lot of third parties when it comes to the past 8 years or so of different game releases. So if you guys enjoy this video, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're new. Now, let me know if you're someone who all of a sudden got a little more interest, if you picked up the Switch 2, in some of your back catalog. The different games maybe you've accrued over the last 7 or 8 years, basically this past generation with the Switch 1, because there were many games that you kind of struggled through a bit, just because of the performance, the resolution, the frame rate. You sacrificed a lot for the convenience of the Switch 1 and its usability as a hybrid device, right? So now that the Switch 2 is here, and we started to realize that, oh wow, Nintendo's doing these free updates. Cool. Okay, so the Switch 2 can do quite a bit more, as we've seen, than the Switch 1. I don't think that's shocking to anyone at this point, based on what we've seen. But we started looking through this like, well, okay, cool. They're adding HDR support, higher frame rates in some cases, mouse functionality, better resolution. Scarlet and Violet are now actually playable, and in fact, they run really, really well now. So I figured, okay, that could see a bit of a spike in terms of sales. Well, with some of the sales information we have coming out around software for the Switch 2, we are indeed seeing a bit of a spike when it comes to things like The Legend of Zelda, either Tears of the Kingdom or Breath of the Wild. Even something like Hogwarts Legacy jumped up the charts big time in places like the UK. But the big thing to me here is a lot of the back catalog games that people put down because they didn't run well, seems like they're getting some renewed interest right now because the Switch 2 is really good at backwards compatibility, more than expected, okay? So, again, the Switch 2 is, according to NVIDIA, 10 times more powerful than the Switch 1. Well, a lot of these comparisons are showing that, yes, it's considerably more capable than the Switch 1. And I've noticed so many videos popping up now. MVG just did one today, where he was going over some of the differences for backwards compatibility, just picking out 10 or 11 games or something and showing it. And every single time it was, hey, this game is now capped. It's hit its frame rate cap of 30 or 60 without any issues, despite the Switch 1 struggling heavily. I saw Deadly Premonition. That's better. It's not locked 60, but that is a game that had those hilarious frame rate of 10 frames per second at times on the Switch. Now it's 45 to 50 some odd frames, 60 indoors. So even a game like that, WWE 2K18, that struggled heavily, it was bad, it was slow motion, is playable now on the Switch 2, which is a shame because that game is completely offline and you're not going to be playing with friends or anything with that. Now that it's playable, it's completely legacy by several years now. I even started installing some games just to see, and I'm curious. I'm going through a bunch of them. So I fire up things like Darksiders 3 that's just locked 60. The resolution that would change in the background dynamically, that is pretty much hitting its roof as well. One that I thought would be kind of interesting and a little weird maybe, DC Universe Online. It's actually on the... Nintendo put out a PDF and discussed some of the issues they have right now with certain titles out of the 15,000 or so games they tested that they're still working through. DCUO is on there, but I downloaded it anyway to check it out, and it does have a toggle to go from 30 or 60 frames. I toggled it on 60, and it's very smooth. It seems like it's hitting that frame rate cap and flying around the city and everything, no problem there. The issue that the Switch version of this runs into is that no one is playing it, so it is completely empty in terms of population, but that was just kind of a random, okay, no one's going to really look at this game anyway, and it runs significantly better. So with that in mind, people have gone back, and now they're just making spreadsheets. There's one right now that's out there, and I had mentioned this earlier in the week, and people were asking me, where's the spreadsheet? I will link it down below in the description if you want to look for yourself, because there are a lot of questions that people have around how games are running, and that's kind of the idea of this master spreadsheet. Now, of course, don't go in here and just start messing everything up, people are actually working together on this, like, civilly. So, go in there and help out if you can. But again, as I'm looking through here, there is something that I'm noticing, and I feel like there is a bit of an opportunity here for third parties. So if you remember this week, we did have that Splatoon 3 update that hit. It's a free update. And it introduced a Switch 2 version. Now, this is a bit different than what we're seeing when, say, the frame rate cap is lifted on a Switch 1 game or imposed, because some games came out, like Dying Light, when that came out on the Switch, that was just uncapped, but then they added a 30 FPS cap to it to try to smooth it out on Switch 1 hardware. That's different than when Splatoon 3 gets an update that's clearly set specifically for the Switch 2, and they have to make some changes to the Switch 1 version to make sure the frame rate is the same across both. I don't think you're going to see third parties really care to do that, but some of the stuff I think would be cool for them to do would be lifting the frame rate cap. All right, so it would still then work on the Switch 1, and that I think is the biggest thing, right? So they're not going to make a specific version unless they're going to sell it, I believe. But if you do an update patch, especially right now when we're kind of in this honeymoon phase for the Switch 2 and realizing what it can do with some of these games through backwards compatibility, you might make some headlines of just, oh wow, this game now is, they raised the dynamic resolution to 720p handheld, 1080p docked, and they also lifted the frame rate cap to 60. That then would basically pinned with highest resolution possible, highest frame rate possible on the Switch 2. Now, the other issue we're running into here, and it's pretty obvious since you kind of see it when you fire a game up on your Switch 2 in handheld mode, the games themselves are capped in handheld mode at 720p. And when you then blow it up to a 1080p display, especially one that's 8 inches, it can become kind of blurry. Sure, some games, interestingly enough, did render at 1080p in handheld mode. And one great example is Hyrule Warriors Definitive Edition. That is rendered at 1080p, so it's set up perfectly for the Switch 2 screen, and because it's on the Switch 2, it just runs at a constant 60 frames per second. So that is one of the better backwards compatible titles that did struggle on the Switch 1 that cleans up perfectly on the Switch 2 and is an easy recommendation if you're looking for a game that fits in really, really well for that handheld experience on the Switch 2. It is a very fun game. The idea that I like here is one where Nintendo would add a couple of settings to the system itself in like their settings menu you can go into, and maybe they have a setting where you can have the docked configuration and resolution be applied to the handheld mode. All right, so it would still be a Switch 1 game, of course. It's not like they're saying, well, we're going to add this to the SDK or whatever, right, to set it up so you can go to 120 frames, or you can go to 4K or 1440p, and then we'll upscale from there. No, this would be the sense of, it's 1080p typically docked. Hey, you have a 1080p screen in handheld with the Switch 2. You can apply that if you want. It's experimental, or it's beta, or it's testing. We don't know what it's going to do, but you can figure it out for yourself, because that's kind of what's happening right now with a lot of these games. And if everything goes according to plan, we'll clean up very nicely and sync up completely with that 1080p screen. And as we've seen with just about all these tests, the frame rate would work fine then. The other thought that I've had with this is the idea that maybe Nintendo could do something like how Sony did with the PlayStation 5. For PS4 titles, you have an option in the settings menu that you can toggle on, and it will work to smooth out PS4 titles. Now, sometimes it's a little soft looking, and you just go, you know what, no, I'm going to turn it off for this. But there are instances where it does make the game just look better in general there. So I almost wonder if Nintendo could do something there, play around with that idea of, okay, Switch 2 games just at a system level, or Switch 2 can go back with these Switch 1 games and smooth them out a bit more, especially if you're taking a game that never gets a patch and it's just sitting at 720p docked. Well, that is going to look blurry. Should run pretty smooth, but it's not going to look great in general when it's blown up to a 4K, 65-inch display there. But what I'm noticing with things like Splatoon 3, when that hits, it makes news. People get really excited. Yes, I know Splatoon Raiders, but also, oh wow, this game runs and looks better on the Switch 2. I'm going to download and check it out. I actually played some of it the other day just to see how it would go, and yeah, it looks a lot better. It was just interesting to me that Nintendo really undersold the backwards compatibility aspect, And I know at this time it's just kind of expected, but think of the history with Nintendo. I mean, yes, they have had cases like the GameCube to the Wii where, yeah, those games worked fine. But then you do have strange things. Okay, like Nintendo to Super Nintendo or Super Nintendo to N64 or kind of the Wii to the Wii U. I know you could still use your Wii remotes. You could still pop your Wii games into the Wii U. But there was the whole thing on the digital side where to transfer stuff over, there was a situation of like you have to $1 or something, or in some cases you couldn't. And it was just sort of stuck. It was a whole thing. Not as seamless as now, where you sign in and you can just pick stuff from your account. It's all attached to it. And you just download everything. Your save data comes with you as well through the cloud, which the only annoyance there is it is locked to a paid subscription. Really should figure out how to make it so you can put it on your SD card. But either way, the point is, the reason so many people are testing stuff is because it is so seamless to take your Switch, remove it, put the new Switch 2 in, and then just go. That's kind of it. So a lot of that really plays into what we're seeing right now. And hey, maybe we'll have third parties show up and say, we're going to uncap this frame rate. We're going to raise the resolution as high as we can in docked and then also in handheld mode. And maybe the game, they put it on sale. Like, there you go. That might actually drive traffic. Not enough, I think, in terms of sales to do an entire Switch 2 version unless they really wanted to get after it. But I'm sure they would sell a couple of extra copies doing that. And certainly it would get picked up on different forums or even in different videos who want to test it. But let me know what you guys think about this down below. If you were someone who maybe was expecting less going into this whole backwards compatibility situation with the Switch 2, and if you've been surprised by it, are you going back and playing some of these old Switch 1 games? Maybe some you decided to just put down hoping for a Switch Pro. Yeah, you got a Switch 2, which is, yeah, kind of a Switch Pro. I think the one that really blew my mind is I am seeing people who are like, finally, I can play The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. It's like, wow, that's a game that you struggle through because there were frame rate issues, but it's like, that's one where I got over it because the game was like that generational release. But it is also one of those titles where if I go back and have never played it before and can play it now for the first time at like the 4K 60 and everything, hey, that's still pretty awesome to be able to experience it in that way. But again, let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.